Welcome. Bienvenidos y buenas noches. Before we begin, I want to ask those of you who have a preference for the Spanish language to click on the globe on your lower right on your Zoom screen, as it shows on our slide. The interpreters are Luis and Andres, and they are really great, but they'll need the speakers to go at a good pace, even a slower pace than usual. I don't want you to miss any other translations, so we hope that you can, listen to the translation if you so need it. Buenas noches. Antes de comenzar, quiero pedirles a aquellos de ustedes que prefieren el idioma en español que hagan clic en el globo mundial en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla y tablero dentro de Zoom. Sus traductores son Luis y Andrés y se necesita que nosotros, los oradores, hablen a un paso normal o quizás despacio. Favor de comentar en el espacio chat en su idioma preferido durante la sesión. Esperemos que sea una experiencia sumamente fácil y productiva. Andrés, would you like to say something? Add to the,
Yeah, hello everyone. We also ask that all Spanish speakers, if you can rename yourselves with an asterisk similar to how I have on my Zoom video. Le pido a todo el mundo que le gustaría hablar en español para las sesiones más pequeñas, que si puede renombrarse en el Zoom con una estrellita como la que yo tengo acá, o ponga un mensaje en el chat diciendo que tiene una preferencia para estar en el cuarto de español. Les agradezco. Gracias.
Gracias, Andrés. So now that we have our Spanish channel working and everybody understands how to get on there, I'd like to acknowledge the ancestors. We claim the space to acknowledge that this is Tongva land. Yet these statements are only a stepping stone to recognize broken treaties to the native people of the sacred land. I honor them as my ancestors and respect and value the many ways their heritage and beliefs continue to manifest in our lives today. In invoking my ancestors, it reminds us all about the sacred and spiritual relationship that has always existed on this land. We acknowledge the Tongva people as the traditional land caretakers of Los Angeles Basin and the Southern Channel Islands. The sacred ones teach us love, compassion, and honor so that we may heal each other and the earth. Awishko Mahili Atamen. Thank you, ancestors. Gracias, abuelos y ancestros, por el patrimonio. Juremos protegerlo. So again, welcome everyone to the Climate Equity LA series, the inaugural Climate Equity LA series. And this is our final discussion focused on the decarbonization of buildings and homes and the economic justice, social justice impacts of decarbonization and climate policy. I want to be able to thank tonight Liberty Hill, our main partner, who has really been a steadfast, collaborative support system for this Climate Equity LA series to be successful. I am Marta Segura, the founding director of the first and only Climate Emergency Mobilization Office, which was launched here at the City of Los Angeles. We have some amazing presenters and dialogue for you with questions and answers and small breakout rooms. We will be posting the program of the series in the chat space as well. I want to thank again the Liberty Hill Foundation, Lane, CBE, Scope, SAGE, PSRLA, Pacoima Beautiful, and so many others like NCSA and the neighborhood councils, the Mayor's Office of Public Engagement, UCLA, and there really are so many others here tonight that I wish I could thank you all. Also, I want to thank our Curriculum Design Committee. We must collaborate and engage at all levels and across borders because climate and pollution don't recognize them. Thus, governments must be as seamless as possible in the execution of our policies and services and address worker justice and economic rights and benefits so that we all can contribute and be part of the solution to save our planet. CEMO, this is the CEMO, sorry, excuse me. Ray, could you put the slide with the CEMO's vision on it, please? Great. So this is our slide with our vision, because I wanted to share with you why CEMO exists. It's dedicated to building this collaborative, innovative, intersectional and equitable climate solutions to support community resilience and limit the climate-related health burdens for us all, with a laser focus on frontline communities. And the reason why we have a laser focus on frontline communities or the most pollution burdened communities is because if we don't work together to lift up every community, especially the most burdened, we will all suffer the worst climate consequences. So it's all or none. That is our philosophy, and it's also substantiated by the science. It doesn't make sense to only provide, climate solutions to those who can afford it. It needs to be provided to everyone, and this means across the globe. Next slide, please. And the overarching purpose of our organization is also to provide an innovative governance model where community voices and mobilization efforts are integrated into the CEMO process, which means that we'll take this information from all of you and the input that we're receiving within the Climate Equity LA series and create it and develop a report that will identify and enact equitable strategies and policies to prevent and mitigate and undo impacts from pollution burdens and disinvestments. And this can only be done with this bottom-up approach, using your strong voice for influencing and shaping policy. Next. So this is our Climate Equity LA innovative governance model. Our blueprint's goal will put community leadership and their voices first and assure that we develop a very collaborative governance structure between our stakeholders and the city of LA to create agency and leadership in our communities. This is how we will meaningfully engage community voices at City Hall. This series is an example of that bottom-up policy design, and we hope we will provide you with very valued opportunities to give your voices the opportunity to shape policy. And systems change, however, requires a very unified approach from all people at all levels. The model we are creating is derived from a very resident identified needs perspective, giving community members much more ownership over policies such as the electrification of new low-income and affordable housing, identifying financing for retrofits for older and existing buildings and their appliances, creating a local workforce that transitions from an oil-based economy to a renewable energy economy, and creating things like microgrids in areas that can suffer the most in the event of a regional blackout. And to go back to our blueprint, basically, we're in step 2 of this process step 3 of this process, or that bubble that says community shares expertise and knowledge throughout the Climate Equity LA series. And then what happens after that is we collect all the polls, the surveys, your input from the small groups, and we create a recommendations and findings report. Our policy committee will review these findings with the CEMO research team, and we'll create a report that the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission will then review and deliberate on. And then that will create the Equitable Climate Action Roadmap that goes to the LA City Council. And we're not just going to do it this year. It's something that's going to be cyclical, because every year we will bring additional climate policy issues that need to be heard at the community level and that the community needs to provide input for. So in summary, we want to create meaningful engagement and civic-led governance strategies for equitable climate policies and investments. We want to help you shape recommendations for equitable climate policies. We want to coordinate and collaborate with city leaders to bring an equity lens to LA's Green New Deal and engage and mobilize the community. We want to deliver an equitable climate action roadmap via the Commission and City Council. And this can't happen without your support. So next, I think we're going to go to the last slide if we haven't already, Ray. We just passed through this slide. I think the next part in the presentation is me introducing the speakers. Today, we're exploring how we can create an equitable green workforce in the context of building and home decarbonization. Over 45% of our gas emissions come from buildings and homes. The impacts of climate change also increase housing instability for low-income communities and communities of color who have faced systemic exclusion from wealth building in the housing market for generations. Climate change intersects with many areas of economic and racial justice in relation to housing, which is the main reason why we must address this issue head on. Local and good paying jobs, green jobs, must be created, and those pathways must be created for unionized jobs as well. It's part of what we hope the goals and the outcomes will be of this final climate policy process. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speakers. Bethany Jones, the founder of Inclusive Economics, who will be presented to you by Robert Zardoneta, our Fuse Fellow from the Office of the Mayor, that is tackling how to create more equitable workforce models for the city of LA. And Robert will open up the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marta. So good evening, my name is Robert Zardoneta. Welcome to our discussion on jobs, the jobs created by building decarbonization. So I'm currently a Fuse Executive Fellow working with the Mayor's Office of Sustainability to help create an equitable workforce in furtherance of the new Green Deal in Los Angeles. And I come to this position with years of experience in sustainable workforce development as the ED of 2 nationally recognized youth build programs in East Los Angeles, where we pioneered the green economy locally and implementing the Green East Side campaign, which retrofitted over 60 homes in East LA, Boyle Heights, and surrounding communities. I was also the Deputy Inclusivity Manager for the LA World Airport's Automated People Mover project, and I've worked on several local and national mega projects supporting the DEI efforts, DEI and local hire efforts. So this evening, I have the extreme privilege of interviewing Bethany Jones, and I'll take this opportunity to kind of pass the mic to Bethany so that she could introduce herself before we get started with the interview.
Sure, thank you, Robert, and thank you, Marta, for those really inspiring introductory remarks and the blueprint that you laid out. I'm rather humbled to be in the presence of all of LA's movers and shakers on how we're going to equitably address the climate crisis. I'm Bethany Jones. I am the founder of Inclusive Economics, which conducted a study in partnership with Lane on some of the equity concerns and opportunities and jobs concerns and opportunities related to building decarbonization in the city of LA. Robert, that's all I have for intro. Do you want to pass it back to you?
Yeah, thank you, Bethany. So an introduction, so let's start the conversation off, and so what do we know about how building decarbonization approaches will affect jobs in LA, in terms of, job quantity or job quantity?
Yeah, so I have some tools here, some excerpts from the report to answer some of Robert's questions today. And to answer this question, what we did in this report was the standard quantitative analysis. What would it cost and how many jobs would be created from decarbonizing LA's buildings? But what we did that was different was that we looked at what are the policy levers or program design options to make sure that those investments in building decarbonization, whether they're public or private investments, are supporting equity and supporting job quality and supporting job access. So what you see here, the middle columns are sort of the standard quantitative results. And we broke down the buildings in LA into some different categories than you might have in a traditional study. So we looked at, what if you invested in schools? What if you invested in naturally occurring and deed restricted affordable housing? What if you doubled down on universities and hospitals, and et cetera? And then what we did was we tied some of these investments to the policy lever that would create the good outcomes that we wanted to see, or that we want to see. And that was, when I say we, I mean, in partnership with Lane and its partners. So if you go to the next slide, what you can see is that we also looked at the distribution of jobs by trade. So often we know that when workers hear about building electrification, they tend to think it's all work for electricians. And when we broke down the work, looking at what would need to happen to decarbonize LA's buildings, we saw that there's actually a lot of work for quite a lot of different trades. And so this is promising because it tells us that even some of those trades that are concerned around job loss due to building electrification would still see work from the retrofit opportunities to decarbonize. And then the final slide that I'll show it, if you can advance, is that we considered the job quality concerns. And there's some real challenges here. While building electrification could support maybe an average of 10,000 full-time workers a year for the next 30 years, that's a lot of work. 85% of these jobs would be in traditionally low road market sectors, meaning that they would be in sectors that where wages are really low. And so that points us to the policy actions that would need to be taken to ensure that that these jobs are good quality jobs. And I'm going to pause there and see if my son could practice piano at a different time. Just 1 second. Robert, did you want to continue?
Okay, great. So on to slide 5. So what were some of the biggest key takeaways for you as a researcher? What do you hope people will take away from your research? And that being said, you know, when I say people, I would think of, you know, how folks individually, you know, in the different impacted groups, how do you think labor would react? What would you like labor to take from your research? What would you like impacted communities to take from research? What would you like impacted workers?
Yeah, those are such good questions. And what was different about this research process than others that I've engaged in is that it wasn't that we just did the research in a vacuum and then put it out for people to absorb however they wanted. There was really an ongoing dialogue with labor and with affordable housing advocates on the questions that we were asking and how we were parsing the data and what kinds of answers, what kinds of problems we were raising and what kinds of mitigation solutions we were identifying. So it was a very conversational process. Not to say that that affects any of the quantitative analysis, but how you package the research makes a difference in terms of how it can be used for advocacy or program design. So one of the big takeaways is that when you're spending public money, the higher percentage of public money that you're spending, the more leverage you have over the social equity and jobs outcomes that are created. And so to think about, you know, as cities embark on building decarbonization, some look at how to subsidize building decarbonization. And if you're subsidizing building decarbonization, what are you getting out of it? Or perhaps instead of providing subsidies to large commercial buildings, you can invest that money instead in upgrading affordable housing and bringing down energy costs for people. And you have a higher percentage of public money, which means that you have some leverage over what kinds of jobs are created and who are they accessible to? Are they accessible to participants in LA's many MC3 pre-apprenticeship programs, for example? So how you spend money really matters. The second thing is that investments in buildings, when they improve the building stock, can easily lead to displacement. And so thinking about the effects, the medium and long-term effects of these investments up front can help avoid some of those unintended consequences down the road. And that additionally, looking not just at upgrading buildings, of course, for their greenhouse gas emissions, but also looking at health and resiliency in the building stock. in LA. So, and then there's various iterations on that general theme, but just that when you're making investments, if you're really intentional upfront about the policies and programs and think through what some of the unintended consequences might be, you have a lot of opportunity to kind of, quote, get it right from an equity perspective at the beginning. You can go to the next slide.
Great, thanks. So what strategies came up in those community conversations regarding the report that you feel would be beneficial, you know, in terms of maybe water efficiency, district energy?
Yeah, so, you know, working with Lane and its partners, we identified quite a few concerns. The concerns are listed in this table on the left. There's concerns such as what happens if only people with the means get off gas, and then that can lead to higher gas prices for people still on gas. How do you mitigate that? So we, in that case, recommended things like look at rate design or increased bill support for energy burdened customers. Think about the consequences of your building decarbonization strategy up front. Or, you know, that the high upfront investments associated with building retrofits might mean that low income customers are left behind and stranded with inefficient, expensive, unhealthy appliances and homes. And so how do you then consolidate funding to really emphasize upgrades in those buildings first to make sure that folks aren't left behind? So for all of these concerns that were raised, we identified sort of a policy lever to address that particular concern. You can go to the next slide.
Great. So getting into a deeper dive, as we look at like slide 7 and 8, you know, what do we know about the quality of jobs being offered, and what don't we know?
So, I mean, there's real concerns, and I think anybody working in this space or paying attention to it has seen some of the opposition from the gas utilities, certainly from workers who are employed by the gas industry. And that includes some building and construction trades that lay pipe, that maintain existing gas distribution infrastructure, that hook up new gas connections. So, so there's a lot of, this is a shift in work, you know, it's a shift in our energy infrastructure. And so with that transition comes some threat of job loss. And I think that, you know, that can be a rather significant political hurdle for local governments to overcome. So we looked at what could make up for some of that job loss. What could cities be doing to couple with building electrification or building decarbonization policy to make up for some of that job loss? So both improve the quality of jobs on the building decarbonization work itself, but also with where there is job loss, try to make up through other investments. And there's some really interesting opportunities that came out of conversations in LA, but also other work I've done in San Diego and in my day job at DOE. But one of the really interesting opportunities is looking at building decarbonization, not from a building by building perspective, but from an infrastructure scale district energy perspective, where you're literally just moving heating and cooling loads without any combustion to provide building space heating and cooling. These are really interesting projects. There's tons of potential. And incidentally, laying a network of pressurized underground pipes to move heat around requires the same skills as laying a network of underground pipes to move gas around. So there's some really interesting skills matching opportunities in this space that we wanted to explore. You can go to the next slide. So here I just want to point out this in the next slide after this, that you know, these big numbers in a table, it's a little bit overwhelming. Like, what do you do with that? If we had, you know, however many billions of dollars that would be required, okay, we know how many jobs would be created, but where do we start? And so we laid out just a couple scenarios, like a couple what ifs. What if there was an incentive fund for deep decarbonization of LA's affordable housing over 10 years? That could address some of the current concerns that I raised earlier in this presentation and create 4,600 to 7,400 full-time equivalent union construction jobs per year, securing affordable housing, improving indoor air quality, reducing energy burdens for low-income renters, and ensuring that low-income residents are not left behind as LA pursues these ambitious climate goals. So that's just one what if scenario. What if you put your money there up front? The next one that we looked at was, and you can go to the next slide, was for schools. What if you over 5 years, say, had an $80 million annual investment, you could decarbonize every single public school, K through 12 school in the city of LA, supporting 400 to 500 full-time equivalent union jobs, improving air quality, HVAC systems, you know, relevant now that we've just come out of this public health crisis, but upgrading schools, upgrading the health and safety in the school environment, and just consolidating funding that already exists to get that job done. So we just wanted to put forward a couple like starting places, I guess, where you can center equity, you can center good quality jobs, and you can show from the very beginning that we can address the climate crisis in a way that is equitable and good for everyone.
So what are some of the strategies for ensuring balance of workers and projects in the supply and demand?
Oh, my favorite topic. Yeah, I'm of the belief in the workforce development space that you train workers in response to real jobs that already exist. We saw a lot of problems during the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, where we were training workers for the promise of jobs that didn't manifest. And I personally ran a green job training program for at-risk youth, and I saw that there were no apprenticeship openings, there were no job openings. You know, we did a nice job training them for jobs that just were not available, and were not going to be available for some time. And that's heartbreaking, and no one deserves to, you know, have their hopes up and put in their time and energy to not have a job realized. So I love the registered apprenticeship model because it's very demand driven. As the work is created through the spending of money in the local community, apprenticeship can flex to take in more workers. And, you know, again, the city of LA has so many excellent pre-apprenticeship programs, and that pipeline is established to get workers into those high road apprenticeship openings that lead to family sustaining careers. So, so we just want to make sure that we calibrate the training of workers for this work with the actual spending and investment and the plan for how that's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I was executive director of a youth build program during the time of the ARA funding, and it was tough. It was tough, you know, to prepare folks for, you know, to prepare young people for that workforce. It really didn't exist. You know, a lot of it was short-term basic weatherization jobs. I remember going to City Hall and talking to Larry Frank, and Larry was like, you know, if you don't have connections with, if you're not pulling folks into the building trades, then, you know, we can't do much for you, you know, in terms of support, you know, but there was no work then. You know, now, you know, there's something, you know, there's a project being built on every, you know, it seems on every corner. You only have to like stand on your rooftop and look northeast and west to see development. So it's exciting, you know, there's very exciting times. So thank you for, I really appreciated those last comments, you know, about pre-apprenticeship and registered apprenticeship, because I think it's really important as we're moving towards building decarbonization and we're attaching that to workforce. And there's, I think it's important to be, you know, to get the labor say in this work. And as we're going through this kind of brave new world, you know, we're reinventing the wheel without reinventing the wheel. You know, the more we could, you know, bring in labor and have processes that are very familiar to them and speak to all the parties in a language they can understand, you know, the better, right? You know, so I'm really optimistic. Well, we have to be optimistic because we can't mess this up, right? You know.
Exactly. It's well put.
So I have a couple minutes left. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about your report that we haven't gotten to, or any questions that you might have wanted to answer but I didn't ask?
Yeah, I mean, no questions, but I did have a couple observations, because like I said a couple times, the process of doing this was different than other research that I've conducted. And I think in some ways, after we put it out, it had a bigger splash perhaps in San Diego than it had in LA. And it kind of shows, you know, as we're trying to you know, engage labor and engage communities in climate solutions, that just the very questions you're asking and how you're presenting the data really matters. It matters to you know, are you getting these research tools and this data into the hands of people that are in a way that's supportive of their advocacy positions, or are you doing research to try to persuade them for something that's not aligned with their core values? And I think in this case, you know, we really tried to do research in a way that was really responsive to the core values and needs of the community. And that resonated way beyond LA. And so, and San Diego, like I said, has done a lot of work using this report and building on it to advance their equitable climate initiative, both in the city of San Diego and the county. So the work, and now, you know, I'm working, my day job is at the US Department of Energy. And with this federal lens, I look at what's happening in California. And what you're doing in LA, what the group of people that organize this call, that are working on these things, that are participating, are doing in LA, is really a model for the whole country. And that's really important. It's not to be understated. And I just have complete hope and faith in this group of organizations and people that you're going to get it right, and in a way that allows everyone else to follow. So just once again, I want to thank you all for your work and your thoughtfulness and your commitment to the city's commitment and the organizations and advocates' commitment to getting this right.
No, thank you, Bethany, for sharing your work. And I mean, I love talking about, you know, the blend of climate and workforce. You know, I could talk about this forever, but I wanted to thank you again, and thank you to all the organizations that to put this event together, for affording me the opportunity, and everyone else to engage in this opportunity for dialogue. So
yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. So Marta?
Great. Thank you, Bethany and Robert. That was really insightful and supportive and helpful. And normally we would go to the Q&A, but we're going to leave those until we go to the next set of speakers, and then we'll bring you both back after that set of speakers, and all four of you will be there to answer all of the questions. So thank you again. That was really exciting. All right. Now I have the pleasure of introducing you to Avni Jamdar, the Bay Area Regional Director of the Emerald Cities Collaborative. And we're going to put some of the resources at the end of our program. And if you haven't seen our program already, it'll be going up in the chat space, and I recommend you bringing that up. But before you do that, I want to also introduce you to Roxana Tynan, the Executive Director of the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy. And both of these speakers are exceptional, and I have the pleasure of introducing them, and they will bring some of this conversation on workforce equity and workforce justice and models that can be used in order to teach us how to move forward. They'll have that conversation next. Roxana, take it away.
Hi, thanks
Hi.
so much for having me. It's a great turnout tonight.
It is.
Excited to have all these folks in the room. And I'm really excited to be having the chance to interview Avni Jamdar about Emerald City's work and enable us all to have a conversation about what some of the best practices are in connecting folks to quality union green jobs. So Emerald Cities is a critical leader in this field in making the connection between really quality union jobs and the folks that we're organizing within communities that need them most. And so can you tell us a little bit more about Emerald City's big vision and share some of your successes?
Yes, absolutely. And good evening, everyone. And thank you for inviting me here. So I am the Regional Director for Emerald Cities Bay Area. I've been here for over a decade with Emerald Cities doing this work. We are a national nonprofit. We're a coalition of labor, business, and community organizations. We were founded in 2009 to create High Road that is sustainable, equitable, and democratic regional and local economies throughout the United States. So we work to advance policies and programs that benefit the environment, the economy, and create equity. And when we say High Road, of course, this is a very educated and up-to-speed audience, but we mean creating living wages and benefits for all workers, especially disadvantaged workers, and business opportunities for small minority women contractors. So we have seen a lot of momentum, across states, regions, and cities acting to craft building decarbonization policies, both, of course, for new construction and now increasingly for existing buildings. So as this work unfolds, Emerald Cities really wants to ensure that low-income communities and communities of color are prioritized and are not left to bear the burden or the unintended consequences of these policies. And we have done this in the past, so we really want to be sure we don't repeat past mistakes, because we know that climate impacts are disproportionately borne by disadvantaged communities. And an all-electric future would ease that burden, and it would result in positive health impacts and indoor air quality. So, however, if decarb policies do not put equity at the forefront, we know they will exacerbate climate impacts and racial inequities. Low-income communities and communities of color need to benefit from the jobs and the economic opportunities that will be created from the work that these policies, the demand-side policies, are going to generate, as Bethany was earlier saying. But we really need to engage community and workers early in the process for their input and collaboration, so we have that procedural equity as we build these programs. Of course, we need to train workers and contractors. We need labor standards embedded in policies so that those folks that are trained are matched to jobs and opportunities. And there are several tools to do this, but fundamentally it involves bringing together labor, government, and community to create those solutions. So Emerald Cities has been working on the equity impacts of building decarb for about over 3 years now. We started back in 2018, we did a national convening for environmental and climate justice advocates across the country to ensure that equity issues are incorporated in state and local policies. And it was webinars and an in-person convening and really getting folks' input. And I think what we learned is what has become collective wisdom, that we really need to position disadvantaged workers for specific training around HVAC. Those that are underemployed, immigrant, face barriers to employment. We need to significantly increase the capacity of minority women, disadvantaged contractors working in this space, because we know there are very few contractors of color that are doing electrification work right now. And as Bethany said earlier, we need to build requirements for diversity into pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship policies. We just need to be more inclusive in general. So some of our recent successes are just getting to local governments to convene community workforce and labor in many meaningful ways to create decarb roadmaps. So we've been doing this locally in San Francisco, as well as in our Seattle chapter, working with EJ and CJ folks to roll out these roadmaps. In San Francisco, we've completed an 18-month-long process to do just that. In Seattle, we've developed an HVAC training program focused specifically on disadvantaged workers, which is a 7-month-long program. We're then connecting those folks to jobs in this space. But we're really not, reinventing or replicating or duplicating anything. We really believe in connecting the dots. So really trying to weave together all that exists into a collective pipeline is what we work towards. I'll stop there.
That's great. I wonder if you can, we've been working here in Los Angeles on the utility pre-craft trainee program at the Department of Water and Power, where we've had a lot of success targeting the folks who really want those jobs in the communities where we're organizing, getting them through the apprenticeship program and into permanent jobs. But I'm curious what you think the sort of key elements, like the HVAC program in Seattle or some of the other successes you've had, what are the key elements to making those programs work best and get the folks who really need and want the jobs into them?
I think that connecting the dots of like workforce development programs that exist, we don't need to reinvent those. They already do good work. In terms of expanding these programs, I think the key is to tie the supply and demand side issues. One concept that we have advanced for this in San Francisco is the idea of a climate equity hub, which is intended as a one-stop shop for residents and consumers, as well as on the supply side for contractors and workers. We really feel, whether it's at the city, county level or the regional level, there's a real, there's so many silos. Green construction or electrification is defined sometimes very narrowly. When folks get trained just for that, they go out into the job market and they're working in construction, right? So I think designing trainings that are also broad enough so that they can take their skill sets and work in the construction sector, but also building that very specific capacity of workers to do, electrification upgrades specifically. I think both are critical to meeting our goals.
Could you say a little bit more, because I know we have some questions in the chat about it, about how to ensure that we are also working on the contractor side of the equation and getting more folks of color and women on the contractor side as well? What have you seen that really works in that arena?
I think that, so we have an e-contractor training academy where we recruit minority women contractors to do this work. I think that if you are deliberate and, we can do that. We can say we will, train minority workers, or contractors. I think that there is a bit of a gap in the whole procurement space in terms of access to training. I think contractors just have so many challenges to work in this sector, to grow a business, to do the job itself. There's just multiple barriers. I think that what we have done is provide, we have an e-contractor academy where it's an 8-week boot camp where we, walk contractors through doing back office operations, change orders, access to financing, bonding and insurance. I mean, these are real barriers small contractors face in accessing any work. So we do that. We also help them then with mentorship and coaching for another 18 years after we graduate them. So I think those are some of the ways in which our contractor outreach has worked.
That's great. Do you feel, we worked really hard to make sure that the trainee program at the utility was one that Scope, Lane, the other partners in Repower LA were recruiting from our communities to get into the program, and that has been successful, and it is paid, which seems like the really critical piece. with a commitment that if you stick around and graduate, which the vast majority of our trainees do, you get a permanent job. And the vast majority have gone to DWP, but also to the city. Do you feel like we're kind of changing the conversation about that in the workforce world, that it's got to be paid, that it's got to lead to a permanent job? Do you feel like are we making progress? What else do we need to do to both shift that and then generally to expand these programs so that more folks are getting prepared for green infrastructure jobs or building decarbonization jobs?
I think that's exactly it. Training folks in a vacuum and, then leaving them out into the job market is we know it doesn't work. So I think that's an absolute best practice. It is, of course, as Bethany was laying out earlier, the whole high road model works great, but but the problem is that there's not enough. It's just not big enough, right? We've had attrition in union memberships over the last few decades. I mean, it's just challenging to take the high road, right? Especially in the residential retrofit sector, which is very exploitative, no benefits, low wages. So yes, I think everything that we design and hold up as a model to show that you can pay workers while they're trained, and then once they graduate, they have a career pathway, and I think that the building trades or just unions in general have such a great model for that, right? Pre-apprenticeship to registered apprenticeship. It's great if you can establish that pipeline. It's not always there. Like there are training programs that don't have those connections, but there are also valid concerns, sometimes it's hard for folks to get into unions. And I think labor needs to partner more with community to open up, their apprenticeship programs to just communities, low-income communities, communities of color.
We've been seeing a lot of success monitoring the building trades apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs in terms of where they're recruiting from, but we still feel like there's a need to expand the pie, the number of jobs that are being created overall. What opportunities, in addition to some of the ones that Bethany was talking about, where do you see the best opportunities for expanding the kind of high road training that's going to work best?
Expanding high road training, I think right now the opportunity is with building decarbonization, right? Installing air source heat pumps. I mean, these are specific technologies. So I think training folks on, EV charging stations, I mean, just new green technologies, right? That's work in itself. I see a big challenge also on the contractor side. I mean, there's, you have workers, but if a contractor is not going to be high road, if they're not paying fair wages, who have their own challenges, right? Who are trying to grow their business and therefore, so I think that for the way I see it is in the residential retrofit sector, this is more of a procurement challenge. There is, of course, the workforce challenge, and that's writ large for the green sector. But if you're talking just building decarbonization, a lot of it is a contractor's game, right? They're not really hiring from union hiring halls. If they're not big projects, they're bringing their crew. So how do we make that, high road? How do we give contractors the resources? Is it, financing assistance so they can manage cash flow better? Is it sort of some kind of upfront, just easing the difficulty of doing business in this space is really going to help make that high road.
And can you help, make sure we all understand what you think some of the biggest challenges are? Like, we want to see building decarb. We know it's going to create a ton of jobs. We have some strategies and examples of the kind of high road training programs that can get people first into pre-apprenticeship and then into the permanent jobs. What's standing in the way? What are some of the key things you're seeing that we need to change or key challenges we need to overcome?
I think the key challenge to me is really engaging honestly with frontline communities. I think we can talk about recruiting workers. I mean, there can be talk about this that's very jargony, but I think that if you really meaningfully engage community into these conversations, they need to tell, folks that there are jobs in this sector, right? I mean, this kind of just education about what are the jobs that are coming needs to come from folks in the community. So for me, a big barrier is the community being left out of a lot of these conversations. And that's really critical to opening up some of these silos. Labor works in a silo, workforce training organizations work in a silo, government works in a silo, and for good reason. But really this time around, what I'm seeing and gives me hope is that we're trying to have those collaborative conversations. And that's kind of where these barriers get addressed. And I think we know all of those barriers, right? Training in a vacuum, not having employers at the table, not having a good anticipation of when the jobs and the opportunities are going to land, having that landscape assessment. But I think that some of those building blocks are in place. We really think that the climate movement needs to be more more of a community engagement focused effort for this to really work.
I see one question from Laura, so I know we're going to do more Q&A, but asking about the hub that you referenced, and if you can tell us a little bit more about that and how it's funded.
Sure. So, we in San Francisco, we came together for an 18-month-long community engagement effort with Poder, which is a grassroots organizing group, and Emerald Cities. We were kind of co-anchors in this work, and we reached out to over 250 stakeholders, but really prioritizing tenants' rights groups, immigrant rights groups, like folks that are not usually at the table. A lot of the real sort of recommendations that came from those folks are themes that I think we've heard earlier today from Bethany. Is we wanted to ensure that there are no renovictions, as we call them, because we're in a very, very gentrifying environment here in San Francisco, and landlords use this as a way to displace tenants. So we were like, no renovictions, no pass-through costs to tenants. We need financial and educational resources for disadvantaged populations, invest in workforce development and training, and then develop equity-first pilots. And so after we developed these set of recommendations, which went into the city's climate action plan, what happened is that the loose coalition of folks that came together, which is Poder, Jobs with Justice, SEIU, SF Climate Emergency Coalition, we continued to advocate at the Board of Supervisors level, and we're trying to get a 1% for climate equity passed, as so having 1% of the city's budget go towards climate equity. So we're asking the city to really invest in climate work. I mean, the Department of Environment here does not get general fund money. So this year, with our advocacy and theirs, we succeeded in getting them $1.3 million. This was historic. So, and that will open the doors further. And the Climate Equity Hub is part of that. And that got funded. And that is in development. I think they've put out an RFP to figure out what it should be. We want it to be a physical hub where you have resources for particularly low-income residents and consumers who want to understand how electrification works, if they're tenants, to understand what their rights are, what their resources are, and then on the supply side, to really build a sort of list of pre-qualified contractors that are, minority women disadvantaged, really working on that equity lens. So we've been really pushing for equity because we really believe that if you have an equity lens, that's the only way to solve the climate crisis. And if we don't have that, we're going to fail. So.
It sounds like we could learn a lot from the hub. It sounds like there are a lot of really critical pieces in there. So an exciting work. But I'm going to end with a tough question that I don't think any of us have the full answer to. But how do we, Bethany talked a little bit about what some of the opportunities building TGARB offers to fossil fuel workers who are, steadily but surely going to be phased out. And how do we ensure we're taking care of those folks? How do we ensure it's a priority? And do we think there, enough of the kinds of jobs that Bettany was talking about, moving heat through pipes instead of moving gas through pipes? Do we think there are really enough of those soon enough to manage the costs? And of course, there was also, folks' pensions to think about as well.
I think that's a really valid and real and burning concern. And the way we got the plumbers and pipe fitters on board in San Francisco for the new construction gas ban was to figure out this gray water recycling in the building, right? And they basically asked for that, and we delayed the start of this policy by 6 months so that could be in place. So I think, solutions like that, where they can go and tell their membership, all right, we're not going to have job losses. Here is the compensation of the losses we were going to incur. And I think that is something they need to be able to say to get behind this, right? And whether that specific solution works in LA or elsewhere, I mean, we've had a lot of folks ask us about how that got figured. And I think it was just through conversation, right? You come together, you figure out, how do we deal with this? How do we figure out creative ways to get our workers, to continue working in this new economy?
Well, that is really exciting. It's super fun to talk with you. I think I am passing over my moderator hat to, Michelle or somebody from Liberty Hill so folks who have been putting questions in the chat that I missed, or who have additional questions they want to put into the chat, please do that and we will call on you.
Awesome. Thank you, Roxana and Avni. That was phenomenal. I'm glad that we're recording this, because I'm going to have to go back and rehear all of it just to really take it in. Now I'd like to ask our production folks to bring back all of the panelists so that Bettany and Robert could also join this Hollywood Squares, because we do have quite a few questions. The first one I'll just start asking. I'm combining a couple of questions in this one. How can we incentivize private sector or corporate investment in job creation of retrofit projects? And initially that was for Bettany, I believe, but why don't we start with Bettany, and then we can move on to the next person.
So how do we unleash the private capital? Basically,
how do we incentivize it?
To do both building decarbonization, but also invest in workforce development, I suppose.
Yeah, the question needed a little more detail, but absolutely.
I mean, I think a lot of the corporate environment is pretty good at following the money. So if there's savings to be had, there's willingness to make upfront investments. And I think that's part of the problem, actually, because the people who have money, whether it's corporate or private citizens, have the money to invest in, say, rooftop solar and save money on their electricity bills. And it has a societal cost to it for everybody else.
Yeah.
But of course, from a climate perspective, private sector engagement is critical. And I think one of the I think that from the workforce development perspective, the private sector has a stake in having an available and qualified workforce. And again, one of the reasons that joint labor management apprenticeship programs are so good is that both workers and their employers are invested financially in those programs. And that model, it's really, robust in construction, but it's really not robust in any other sector at all. And that really needs to be expanded, where employers aren't just counting on public workforce developments to make sure they have the workers that they need in any industry, but that they're really willing to make those investments themselves because they see a return. Just one example, there's a solar company in West Virginia that voluntarily decided to organize its workforce to support the organization of its workforce under IBEW. And they said it was the only case where the firm owner was coming to the union saying, we want to organize, especially in solar, which it's rather uncommon. And he said, he has a staff of 75. He has one HR person because the union takes care of the benefits and most of the HR needs. He doesn't have to invest anything in training because that's taken care of through the union. And he was paying union wages anyway. And he said the quality of the workmanship on his projects is night and day. There's no contest. So that's a private sector company that saw the benefits for themselves, for their company, for their business model in doing the right thing for workers. And I just think we don't hear enough of those stories, but I think that, and like Avni was saying, union density has declined to such a great extent over the last few decades that there's less and less experience that people have with those labor management partnerships, but they really do work, and they work for both sides. So we just need to spread those stories and help support people experimenting a little where they might not otherwise.
Thank you, Bethany, for telling us that there's a flip side of incentivizing and giving us such a great example of anecdotes that need to be more visible so that those kinds of labor jobs are more well accepted here in California by the solar companies, because we have many. And if they could see that, that would really help. Would anybody else care to comment on that first question?
Yeah, I'll just add a different perspective. I don't know what was the exact intent of the question, but another way to think about high road outcomes is to have labor agreements in place, right? And they always apply on public sector projects, but a best practice could be for big corporations to have project labor agreements negotiated, or community workforce agreements where you can really build in some of these high road outcomes. So I think, again, pushing for that, it's very hard to get an Apple building a campus here in Santa Clara to go with a PLA. It's shocking, but yeah, I wish they were, better players.
Great. Francisco Arvizu from SAGE asked, so how are we going to address the non-union workers? And I think we've been addressing that actually, but I wanted to ask Francisco's question. And his second part of his question said, how would these workers get qualified or get trained for these great union jobs, great union green jobs?
I could say a little, and I'm sure Avni can say even more. Like the training program, which is like pre-apprenticeship program at the utility, the only requirement is a driver's license because it's going into largely government work. So you don't need anything. You don't need high school. You don't need a GED even. With a lot of the pre-apprenticeship programs, there are a bunch of great ones in LA that give folks a leg up to enter a full-time union apprenticeship program, which is a paid on-the-job training, leading you to a permanent job. And so, the challenge in getting in has been that when there's not enough work happening, then the building trades are loath to expand the apprenticeship programs and have folks sitting on the bench and not working. So there are a lot of pathways in for folks. And, some trades like the electricians, you need a little bit of algebra. So I'm not going to be an electrician for that reason, but both the pre-apprenticeship programs and the union programs themselves actually train folks. And so one of the things I think, as Avni was talking about the conversations that happen, is, the partnership we've had at LADWP means that we and Scope are going out, knocking on doors, talking to folks, saying, here's how you sign up, this is what you need to do, and that needs to be expanded even further.
That's really wonderful, Roxana. And I've also been seeing a lot of posts lately of promoting trade education at the high school level, and even before that, so people know that it's not just a honorable option, but it's a great option, and it's an option that can really pay well. So it really has to be a holistic approach, so that all of us could participate in making sure that it's a wonderful opportunity that's put out there early on, and that they take it. So the next question that I see here is, from Wesley. Is it useful to think about impacts of jobs related to the supply chain from the raw materials and products used for the retrofits? So not only like the installation and the end products and the construction, but how do we also think about the supply chain?
Yeah,
go ahead, Bethany.
100%. I think in that comment was also mentioned Lithium Valley, which is, one of the greatest sources of lithium on the planet, and right there in Southern California. And so developing a battery supply chain around there and across the country is really important to capture some of these manufacturing and supply chain jobs. And there's a whole bunch of things that need to go into doing that, because it's these products there's a lot of cost competition. We didn't look, the building decarbonization isn't so much looking at battery storage, but there is the Blue Green Alliance has a really impressive database for energy efficiency products that are manufactured in the US. There's a map, it lists every domestic manufacturer of energy efficiency products. And that's just an incredible matchmaking tool, so that as you're making these investments, you can get a lot of assistance to source equipment domestically. And that's when we're not capturing the supply chain jobs, we're really not capturing the economic, or I'd say political, benefits of our decarbonization strategies. Like, the more good jobs we can create across more industries, the more people are going to be on board with, more of the same, like more ambitious climate targets and quicker action and more public investment. So it takes a little bit of extra legwork to, buy American. There's an executive order to make sure that happens with federal procurement dollars. But it's something that we can all do. It's the same as, like, if you're going to a hotel, look up what are the union hotels, or but it's the same idea. Like, your dollars are votes, and where you're getting products, it determines whether those are US based jobs or not.
Thank you, Benny. Robert, I think you were also trying to answer the previous question. Did you want to?
Yeah.
Address that?
I think it's important to learn a lesson from past mistakes. Like I think we mentioned in our conversation with Bethany around the RF funding and creating those short-term, creating tons of training programs, but not having the jobs to match it. So I think really looking at, as a city or as a county, as we look at all these developments that are being built or building decarb projects, to start from the top, identify the projects that are going to be worked on, identify how many jobs are going to be created by that, what the workforce demand is, and then connecting them to, through project labor agreements or PLAs or community benefits agreements, connecting them to community-based training programs, which will then funnel folks that are training through the community into these jobs, so that we're preparing folks for jobs that exist. And, and it might be one project, the reality is, one project, there might be 1,000 jobs, but, the local hires might be maybe 10 out of a group, but 10 is significant. If we get 10 folks, on into a great union job and onto pathways that are going to work on other jobs, it's, and as we scale up, the more opportunities will be there. But I think that's important. I think talking about going into schools, as we're now talking, I think connecting industry to educators and taking away this thought that that there's a separation between STEM and vocational education. The best way to teach STEM or teach mechanical reasoning is through building a car. Stop making auto shop. Why is an auto shop STEM? Why is it just for folks that want to work with their hands? The reality is, the electricians union are now looking at aren't recruiting at local pre-apprenticeship programs. The youth programs that I was leading, back in the day. Now they're looking at Cal State LA and the engineering department for new electricians. So it's really important that as schools we educate young people and put them in paths to succeed that are matching them into these high growth pathways.
Wonderful. That's really great. I wish I had another hour with all of you. This has been really rich and informative, and I definitely recommend folks to go back and look at this recording to really dig deep on some of these responses. But now we have to transition over from the Q&A to our small group breakouts to hear the rich input from those in the audience. And all of you are invited to participate in the small groups too. That would be a real treat, kind of like having a celebrity in the small group. So thank you all again, Bethany, Roxana, Avni, Robert. You were wonderful, and really honored to have you here. Andres, take it away.
Hello, everyone. How you doing? Andres Gonzalez, he, and pronouns. So right now we're about to enter breakout rooms of about 30 minutes or so. Each breakout room, if you've experienced it before, I may be repeating myself, but for those who are newcomers, each breakout room will have a facilitator and a note taker. It'll just be 3 broad questions kind of leading the discussion, which I'm going to share in the chat, but I'm also just going to kind of repeat verbally. Let me share the chat right now. Okay, so the first question is, in your view, what are some of the benefits of building decarbonization related to economic justice and workers' rights? Second question is, one second, I want to copy this. Second question is, what are some of the challenges related to building decarbonization? Oh, sorry, I lost my page. What are some of the challenges related to building decarbonization as it relates to economic justice and workers' rights? And then the final question, which is really where we see kind of the bulk of conversation occurring, is what are some of the ways, what are some of the things that could be done to make sure building decarbonization is equitable for you and your community? And y'all will have about 30 minutes or so. So with that, Giselle, if you can start up the breakout rooms. And one final comment, for anybody who needs Spanish translation, please feel free to message me in the chat or just say here, and we can make sure we put you in a space where we can support you with that. I haven't gotten any messages, so I assume there are no Spanish needs right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. So we're all going to be moving to our small group breakouts, and we will be back here in the main room as soon as your small group breakouts, and we'll have sharebacks after that, and then announcements. So thank you for your patience.
Thank you, everyone. Much appreciate that. Okay. And then I see, acá estamos con el tocayo, con Luis. Hola, Imelda, buenas. ¿Necesita traducción en español o no, no quiere meterse en la conversación? Imelda, do you want to be in a Spanish room? Or, oh wait, she needs to unmute herself.
That's one of our commissioners, so.
Yeah. Cierto. Okay, appreciate that. Okay, cool. Perfect then. I'm gonna just pause for a moment. Oh, hello everyone. How y'all doing? Welcome. I hope I didn't kick anybody out. It seems like some folks may have accidentally left the room, or maybe when it asked you to leave room, you accidentally clicked leave meeting. I don't know.
No, they're gonna automatically close in 30 seconds.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that'd be quite a horrible thing if
they're just transitioning. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, no.
So it's going up again here.
Yeah, we got 15 seconds or so. So in a little bit, I will ask 3 of the facilitators to kind of share some of the takeaways. Opa, hello everyone, how y'all doing? Hello Gina, Alicia, Marta, everyone, how y'all doing? Thank you for coming back. Hermes, Carrie, Alex, how y'all doing? Hello, Hadan, Pilar, awesome. Okay, cool. I think we're all back. Thank you so much, y'all. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your patience. And now I think in this part, I'm going to just be asking 3 of the facilitators if they can go ahead and kind of share brief takeaways for our facilitators as a friendly reminder. If you can just, provide key takeaways, from the 3 questions that came up. And as a reminder, not to name anyone specifically, just kind of the broad points that came up in conversation. So starting on my list, Pilar, do you want to start us off on some of the takeaways from your breakout room?
Hi, I will make sure because we had a long conversation, very nice team that came for that break room. So in the first question, we speak about salaries. We can have fair salaries for working opportunities, and that we mentioned that this is something that can be regarding workers, can be wrong or can be right. It's not work properly because the workers can get underpaid. And that another commentary was to mobilize and organize to have right salaries, and with this green economy, that this don't only be a green, but be a just green economy, that where we can organize and politicians can listen what we say and bring this to the city councils to work better for workers. Then was mentioned too about benefits, trainings, to be able to get better skills so the workers can have better salaries as well. Then the second question regarding regarding the challenge, that one of the challenge was that the companies have the capacity to integrate faster to this process than the communities. And then that they integrate faster, this can be the more, can be for the way of the companies, not necessary for the communities. So it's very important to slow the pace with the companies. It try to mobilize communities, create code enforcements, policies to generate protections, grants for the projects to be complete, to don't leave projects in the half of the way. That will be very important to facilitate grants for companies, that there need to be politics behind all of this. Don't leave the things just in the air. And that there is it's a challenge. So there can be schools or programs to provide workers opportunities. And the last question was about how this affects you, like a citizen, how this can affect you. So one was that can generate evictions. The renovations can generate displacements as well. And then, but they say that are good things to overcome this situation, how this affect the community, is to go to community college to facilitate trainings that this can be affecting you in a positive way. If you get the education to be participating in the programs. Another thing that was mentioned here that can be affecting the community is the gentrification. How this affects? Then was mentioned the relocation again. Was mentioned that it's very important to have workshops for tenants to be informed about this situation, and then have the right education for tenants, and then to how the city connection with this tenant. Who will see if a tenant has a complaint, who is going to see this tenant? Will be CEMO, will be housing, and just we left open is only any other member of the group would like to add some, and then you have the notes as well. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much, Pilar. Yeah, so definitely hearing kind of the need to tie, salaries and wages, as well as benefits, with these green salaries, that green jobs aren't just green, but that they're also just, I think I heard also the need for benefits and training to kind of help scale up to that. Companies that may have the capacity to keep up with the pace of just transition, whereas communities don't. And I also really like that idea, hearing the emphasis on school and training programs as a possible way of preventing displacement, right? Partnerships with community colleges to help train local residents, and just also workshops supporting tenants and clarity as to who they have to go through in the city. Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much, Pilar. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the group. I only pass in their ideas.
No, that's beautiful. We're all just conduits here trying to carry the message. I appreciate it. And Edmis, since I see you on my screen, do you mind sharing kind of what were some of the takeaways?
Yeah. So we also had a very productive conversation. So essentially under the first question about what are some benefits of building decarbonization or clean energy buildings, is, well, for starters, the clean air, right? And then also transitioning away from fossil fuels over to renewable energy, but also that it'll bring opportunities or new opportunities for workers that are transitioning as well. And then another benefit that was also spoken on was that it can also benefit the workers that are already working in these industries that essentially of these new jobs that will be created, right? And also it could also be used as a way to positively impact folks that are facing health barriers to be able to enter this workforce as well. And it can also be a pathway for younger folks like youth to be able to enter these jobs that are being created as well, if done properly. And so those are that. And then another thing that was mentioned was also that it can help shift kind of the education system in the way of like vocational training, or like the way that things are being taught, in order to for folks to be able to get these jobs as well. And so yeah, so that was essentially what was talked about as some of the benefits that can come from decarbonization. And some of the challenges that were mentioned was gentrification, being an issue, especially when to say, there's all these jobs that are going to be created. However, who's going to be in those jobs, or who are those jobs going to be for, and who will be, being able to get access to having these jobs, and also what that would do, with the prices of rent, etc. So gentrification could, be a challenge when it comes to decarbonization, as well as who will be given priority in all of this, this whole transition of decarbonizing. Like who would be not only affected more, if there's, it was mentioned, if there's already groups that have been dealing with environmental injustice, will they be getting the shorter end of the stick, for example, or will they be prioritized, as well as the labor agreements, if there's labor agreements that are put in place when it comes to these jobs that will be created for, decarbonization, how are folks going to be I guess job creators, are job creators going to be incentivized to fulfill the terms of those agreements, as well as the overall expense of decarbonization could be a lot. Who will be the ones eating that cost, or paying that cost, is a big concern. And there was also the concern that that decarbonization essentially is something. It was mentioned that wanting clean air is something that the community wants. However, how much say does the community have in the policy making, which is something that was discussed, and how that can be a challenge within itself. And so that essentially was how we transitioned over to the third question of how to make it more equitable for everyone when it comes to decarbonizing. Essentially, it would be for a starting point would be reaching commonalities, or having a larger conversation about what is it that folks are looking for when it comes to decarbonization. What are things that everyone would want in this process. And so when with that being said, we talked about, or we discussed a lot about utilities, and how utilities are very expensive at the moment, and so how that can negatively impact folks that are already have been historically having a hard time paying utilities, and how that could actually lead to a lot of displacement, and how that can be an issue for a lot of people, making certain people's situations worse than what it already is with decarbonization, as well as how do we so affordability, but also reaching more to make it more equitable would be essentially it was discussed as we would need to have a more holistic approach, that would essentially take everyone's thoughts into consideration, and as well as prioritizing folks that have normally been left out of the conversation. And then another thing was,
sorry, just for the sake of time, because we're reaching 7:53, I just want to make sure we have time to get to the last group, and also to do the short Menti poll afterwards. Pardon the interruption, but I really appreciate you sharing those points. And I think what I'm hearing is, again, like the emphasis around like clean air, making sure that we're integrating with any just transition with like clean air. I really like the emphasis around like kind of health barriers, as well as like barriers in different generations, who is prioritized, I think, in any process of a just transition. And then I think to your last point, kind of the need to make holistic approaches that also don't just add more utility burdens on folks.
Yeah, and I would just like to add one last major point that was spoken about, is making the education around this accessible to all.
Excellent, appreciate that. And then I know we're really pressed for time. Hadan, if you want to just like in a few sentences, just maybe share some key takeaways, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. Oh wow, I just see myself. One really, we had two really big. We had a really good discussion. Two things came of that. One, something I didn't really think about before, but having worker protections in form of breaks in water, and like overall health support for workers who work outside. So the people who would be building all these buildings that we're looking forward to building is really important, I think, to mention, because I don't think we've had a discussion about that in the spaces that I've been in. And then another thing was that folks were worried about pass-through costs. How are landlords and the corporate folks who are owning our housing, how can we make sure they don't pass these costs on to renters via illegal rent hikes, or if it's not rent controlled, then legal rent hikes. And then some really interesting questions about grid, and how do we make sure everything, how do we make sure everything just stays good, I guess, or gets good, and that we don't have rolling blackouts in poor communities, and a whole bunch of other good stuff that are all in the notes, but I will leave you here.
Oh, Hadan, thank you so much. I appreciate that. No, but I think that's a brilliant point. Kind of, I think also similar to something Hermes was mentioning, is like almost the health barriers to some of these jobs, the difficulties that they pose for workers as well. How are these costs passed through? and just making sure that they're, they're equitably distributed, as well as just making sure that any added burden on the grid isn't going to lead to more rolling blackouts, right? Ensuring people have access to continued electricity. Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll also be kind of channeling the notes to get all of these into concrete points. So I really appreciate you all. I shared the Menti in the chat. I'm not sure if we have time to share, but if you can just kind of add your key takeaways. Oh, thank you, Ray. So yeah, if y'all folks can just kind of start populating a little bit, this is really helpful for us just to hear you all out a little bit in terms of what stood out to you today. And it'll also be part of as a qualitative tool for us to really highlight what were the kind of priorities and themes that came up for you. So I'm saying workers' rights, importance of labor and environmental justice at the table together. I think going back to the holistic points that were mentioned. And yeah, feel free to kind of populate this as different thoughts come through, seeing providing new jobs for fossil fuel workers. Thank you, economic justice.
Thank you, Andres. I think what we'll do is we'll let people continue populating the Mentimeter, and I'll just summarize the takeaways for today. That was really rich. My heart is full with all the amazing contributions from the community and the wonderful sharebacks from the facilitators. So we had a really rich conversation today, so I'm not even going to get to a fraction of, the takeaways, but let's start with this. Equitable workforce outcomes can lead to a thriving, green, and healthy economy for all. So that's a real upside. But we need to be very intentional about how to design programs with worker benefits and tenant protections for the opportunities for small businesses, women, people of color-owned businesses to get into the pipeline of this green work and retrofit work, right? We need to understand that implementation is key. We can win good policies and programs. In fact, we have many right now, but how do they roll out into our communities, and where are the investments for the implementation coming from, and how do we guarantee they get to those that most need them? And then finally, I have about 10 more takeaways, but I'll end with this. We have a survey for you at the end of this, which is really important, and it's part of our share back, and it'll go into the report. We're also going to share the registration for April. We're going to be talking about community-driven climate resilience. That's going to be a lot more focused on climate adaptation for our communities, how to get ACs and rooftop solar so that people can actually be more comfortable in their homes, but without the unintended consequences. So this is going to be 3 sessions in April. So I want to encourage all of you to continue to participate so that we can make this blueprint, this model for CEMO really work and help to shape policy at City Council. We're also going to be launching our commission, the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission, in July. And many of you will be there. All of you are invited to speak to our commission during public comment. And we're going to report to them these responses from today and the entire series. And that's how to make your voices heard, because those voices will be heard by you through the report, be taken to the commission, to the City Council. And we are certain that these voices and this input will be respected. I hope I didn't miss anybody. I want to say thank you to everyone who spoke today, to everyone who facilitated, the note takers, the audience. All of you were an important part of this session and making all of this successful. And I hope to see much more of all of you in the future. So have a wonderful evening and take care. Thank you so much.